All right. We still have not figured out how to transition gradually and easily out of the music, but I'm Richard Ruane, and this is Wizard Killers, a show by Plus One EXP, a monthly interview series with accomplished indie game designers who are slaying the game. If you are exploring a professional or hobby career in tabletop and want to learn about from the successes and failures of other creators, join us on the third Tuesday of each month as I sit down with a different creator to talk about their craft. And today I am joined by someone who has been a significant influence on my work and has certainly been a presence ever since I started in indie game design. Marx Shepherd of the what? I'm sorry.
What accolades?
uh, uh, who is sorry, and Marx a few months ago, just as Tony and I were sitting down to plan this program, started messaging around to talk about what to do when crowdfunding doesn't work as a topic for media. I knew that Marx had posted a lot about it and had a lot to say about it. And so I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to sort of kick off this show with a topic that I think it's certainly a thing that a lot of people don't want to think about, but it is something that I think anytime you're looking at or entering into a crowdfunding project should be somewhere in your planning phase or the back of your brain, an awareness that this may not work out because we come to crowdfunding with no guarantees. And you're no stranger to crowdfunding. And I think I want to start, Marx, but pulling up our list of questions. And let's just to get a little bit of background about you. Who are you, and what is Far Horizons Co-op? What's been your experience in RPGs? So
so I'm Marx Shepherd. I am a game designer and editor, freelance editor, and community manager at the Far Horizons Co-op, which is an international collective of indie tabletop role-playing game creators of all disciplines. Really, we cover the gamut from designers to writers to editors and proofreaders, graphic designers, layout designers, illustrators. Pretty much, I think we've covered nearly all of the roles at the co-op now, with a membership. And we publish games on and off, either through straight writing to royalty schemes like the Thousand Burning Stars series, formerly things like the Short Games Digests, and later the Far Horizons anthologies, and then more bigger projects like the Role Player's Guide to Heists, which was the first Kickstarter campaign that we ran a little bit before my time at the co-op. And then the second one was the Far Horizons Guide to Cults. Cults, which has just come out in hardback, which is a really nice guide to cults, basically. And last year we tried to crowdfund the Far Horizons Guide to Death, which was, shall we say, less successful. So yeah, that's a little bit about the co-op, a little bit about myself.
And what is, just out of curiosity, could you say a little bit more about what your role of community manager is? I think most of us know what sort of the editorial component of being sort of a freelance editor.
Sure. Basically, as well as sort of adminning and moderating the Discord server that we all work in, I did formerly do quite a lot of social media posting and things like that, and ensuring that we were collecting the right kind of people. The co-op is really non-hierarchical. That's a difficult word to say, but we do have some kind of people who just step up to perform certain functions, and one of those is kind of a long-term oversight role to make sure that everything is going as it should be. I sort of think of myself more as a kind of trustee than I do a leader, because I'm rubbish at leading people anyway. But I like to be a spokesperson. I like to advocate for the co-op and, proposing projects as well and things like that. So that's my general role. It's kind of overseeing everything and saying what is happening and whether or not that's more or less the right direction in line with where we are as a community and as a space.
Fantastic. So I'd like to know a little bit more about the Far Horizons Guide to Death. I remember when you first made a public pitch for doing the project, and I thought that's really exciting. I didn't have like a great idea to submit, but I kept seeing more and more people excited about submitting something to it. And you ended up with a really great team of collaborators. Who tell me a little bit about sort of what was or is the book, and sort of what was the vision, and who was on the team?
Sure. So the book itself was sort of planned to be this kind of very pretty book of short games and essays about on the subject of death in like lots of different topics and themes. And what we did is we went to a sort of public pitch, and we just said to everybody in the world, if you want to pitch a short game about death, go ahead. And we got something like, I want to say 89 submissions. I have forgotten the number because it's almost last year now that we were, well, it was last year, but it's almost a whole year ago that we started this process. And we got loads of submissions, some of whom were from the co-op, most of whom were from further afield, like other people in the indie space, and a huge amount of people that I hadn't heard of before. Also, some people I had heard of and was really excited to work with. What we did is we did a lot of sort of judging on that, and had a panel of people who were going through all these games and deciding which ones we wanted to put forward. And in the end, we came up with a collection of 4 games. So I'm going to try and list these off because I will remember them all. There is Porna M's Shadow Market, which is a sort of kind of gloomy game about what it means to kind of exchange some of your life in exchange for money, or to exchange money in order to reduce someone's life. And I it's also feel like a kind of oblique commentary on capitalism, which is fairly distressing to kind of think about, but it's done in a kind of mythical way. It's a game that I was really excited about, and I wanted to work with Porna because she'd done loads of really interesting stuff and sounded like she had done work in interesting spaces. So yeah, she was someone I was really keen to work with. The second game was let me see if I can get it right. Car on Rails, which was a sort of glib, whimsical look at the myth of the ferryman, where the ferryman has been replaced with a massive rail corporation because there's a lot more people dying, and they're like nasty corporate overlords, but the individual psychopomps are nice people who are trying to ferry people to the next world in as nice and as non-traumatic way as possible. But you're dealing with like horrors from the void and awful bosses and things like that. And again, there's kind of a look at capitalism there, but there's also a kind of hopeful and whimsical story about a myth which I think is kind of interesting. I like psychopomps. I think psychopomps are cool. That game's by Keith Asada, who does work for the co-op. They've produced some interesting games for us in the past, such as the Boundless Library, which is part of the Thousand Burning Stars series. Another game is Jeremy Borders' Upon the Digital Sea, which is a game about how online communities live and die. And that's a really interesting game because that's about this, like some members from an online community meeting for the first time at the funeral of one of those, of another member of that community. And the story is told through changing a 11-word story that eventually becomes a 55-word story. And it's all kind of, I don't really know how to explain the mechanics, but it's cool. It's a cool game. That's by Jeremy Borders, who's someone I'd not really worked with before, but has, I think, works in actual play and does some other things around that. And the last game was Jessica Markram's Farewell My Heart, which is a game about terminal illness and unrequited love that eventually gets expressed, and that's one of these games that's played with a tumbling block tower. It's based on I can't remember Jessica's system name, but it's a tumbling block tower and a deck of cards, and it's yeah, really deeply, tragically emotional. Also, hopefully, a little bit uplifting, because otherwise it would be very sad. But Jessica was someone we were really excited to work with, and I don't think we could have turned this game down because it was exactly the kind of thing that we wanted. So yeah, we were really interested in that. And there's an essay as well, which is about kind of how neurotypical people and neurodivergent people view subjects around death, and like an academic set of interviews and dissection of the outcomes of that, and which we were really excited to work with because it touched on all the themes that we were talking about with the other games there. So that kind of holds the whole thing together.
So
sorry, that went on for ages.
Oh no, that's great, because I think that builds some context over what kind of project we did not get, at least in as of last fall. Because I think it's important to be like, when a Kickstarter doesn't make, we've in many ways missed out on something. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about, like, last fall, during the Kickstarter around October, you started posting a little bit about, let me go back to my notes real quick, specifically how crowdfunding campaigns are priced, and how people estimate their goals. What are your thoughts on pricing a Kickstarter, or pricing just a crowdfunding campaign in general, and how people might go about doing that in a way that's, I think a lot of us have known for a long time that the way we price our goals on Kickstarter aren't sustainable, but we're not necessarily sure how to shift the culture without losing customers.
So it really gets to the heart of what I think. So there's this big unspoken issue really in crowdfunding in general, but specifically I think games crowdfunding really hits this mark. And there's this kind of idea that has been propagated over time that actually you should aim lower than you actually need, because campaigns that are funded are more likely to attract further attention. And while that's really cool and that seems to work for people, for a small collective or for an individual creator, that's not possible. You can't do that because you will end up making something on risk, and it's your personal risk. So the idea with crowdfunding this is that it would pay for all of the writers' upfront labor, which is not how we usually work in the co-op, and I can get into that another time, but it's sort of not really that important. But it would also pay for 75% of the labor for the co-op staffers, the editors, the proofreaders, and so on. And then the remaining 25% of their work would be covered by royalties later on. I didn't really want to shift that balance too much because I know what long tail sales look like, and they don't produce an enormous amount of money for us long term, really. So what as well as all the things like the fees and the actual printing of the books, that's a fairly major component, sensitivity consultancy, things like that, all that really important stuff that does need to happen. And so we put a budget together, and it comes out to break even without even any profit being made on this. We needed 13,000 British pounds, which is something like $17,000. So it's like it's not an extraordinary amount of money by crowdfunding campaigns, but you go away and you look at like I'm trying to remember the exact figures, but someone like Free League Publishing, no shade on Free League at all. I think they're amazing what they do, but they aim low. Like their initial goals are $10,000, and like you're producing thousands of books. There's no way that you can produce that for $10,000. It's ridiculous. So it's kind of unstated that goal would not break even. If they got £10,000, that book would not happen. or it would happen, but
Mhm.
it'd be massive dent to like whatever assets they have. As a collective, we just don't have assets. We don't have
Right.
capital that we can dissolve to turn things into to cash. So
Mhm.
if we were to say, okay, let's try and get £6,500 instead, so it looks great when we fund, and if we only got £7,000, the book wouldn't go ahead because I wouldn't have enough money to even print it, let
Right.
alone pay the staff. So it kind of got to the point where I didn't want to go away and say, let's aim lower than we need, because it's not fair on the staff. Either the book doesn't happen or somebody has to personally take the financial risk on that. And, the likelihood is it would fall on me because there's not a lot of funding left anywhere else. And
Right.
I personally can't fund $10,000 worth of staff costs. Like
Right.
that's
Right.
outrageous. So, yeah, that's where we got to basically,
Mhm.
ultimately. So we went for the break-even price, and we failed to get that. Not by an enormous amount, but we raised half the funds. So
Mhm.
I guess maybe if we'd aimed for half, perhaps we could have got it earlier. And into the lounge. Yeah, go into the lounge. Okay, and shut the door behind you. Thank you. So yeah, we aimed high and missed.
Mhm.
Basically,
Yeah.
is the long and short of this story.
Mhm. Um. So, what are your thoughts about sort of that's shifting away from that culture of or that expectation that you're going to aim low in order to fund? Uh, sort of how has this Kickstarter specifically or this crowdfunding project sort of kind of helped develop or shift the way you think about how Kickstarter should be priced? Um,
I mean, I think personally,
mhm.
it's a combination of big players getting into crowdfunding as a
Right.
kind of means of hype generation.
Mhm.
And like there are big names out there who do this. There are big names out there who don't do this, and actually that's kind of cool. And it's made for a more sustainable space that Wizards of the Coast don't do this.
Right. Right.
And it's made for a more sustainable space that Paizo don't do this. But there are a lot of fairly big hitters who do continue to do this, who don't need to. They have massive customer bases who
Mhm.
will buy their products whatever. They could do pre-orders in whatever way they wanted to, and they do not need to raise capital this way. So I think it's partly that, but I also think it's backer culture. And I think this is the kind of thing that, I don't know, maybe Will and Adam talk about on the Brain Trust. Like, backers behave in a weird way, and like, I'm a backer, I do this as well. But like, if I
Oh,
look on somebody's Kickstarter page and they haven't funded yet, and it's 3/4 of the way through the campaign, I'm asking, why haven't you funded? Why is there not
right.
a strong impetus behind this? And like, yeah, that's great. It's great to be able to say, well, let's just change that. But that's psychology, that's customer psychology, and
Right.
it's really
Yeah.
difficult to battle against that unless you have a really cool product that will cross the line. And it's just tough.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed my opinion, and my opinion is that you should aim for something that allows you to sustainably break even and
Right.
have a small pot of contingency left over.
Mhm.
But I don't think that whatever I say will make a difference to how other people will or should back their campaigns, price their campaigns, because fighting against backer culture is just fighting against customer psychology, and that's not really something that you have any ammunition for, you know. So you do have to make these shortcuts, these tricks of charging low and having stretch goals and things like that, and all the things that actually might be really bad for
Mhm.
publishers.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I think you just have to make your decision about whether you want to be transparent or whether you want to go for something sustainable. Maybe we took the wrong approach. Maybe what we should have done is aimed smaller and started producing a smaller book or something to begin with and building up. And I think that's something that, we can come to later.
Okay. Yeah. I definitely want to circle back to that. I know that you and I have both been part of a lot of servers that sort of focused on creator mutual aid and mutual support. And I think one of the things that we had talked about is if you were going to walk somebody through sort of making that price point decision, like where should they set that? What would you sort of do? How would you sort of walk them through that process? What questions would you ask? What do they need to keep in mind
in terms of
setting a price point for their Kickstarter? Or I keep saying a funding goal for their
funding goal. Yeah. As I said, I think the most transparent and honest thing you can do as a publisher without a lot of money and capital behind you is to price it accordingly to the costs that it's going to be. And those costs are, it's as simple as how much is it going to cost to write, edit, etc., illustrate, layout, how much is it going to cost to print, and what are the additional things that you need to buy, which is generally like Kickstarter fees, things like what's the other one, payment processor fees, backer kit fees if you're then going to have a separate platform, things like that. And then I always strongly advise people to just add 10% on top of it, because prices change, stuff gets more expensive. There's inflation's high everywhere, so 10% seems fairly standard contingency pot. If you get to a point and it's like 10% takes you another $1,000 over, well, maybe ask yourself the question, can I survive with 5% contingency? Reduce the amount of contingency. That's fine. And then round it to the nearest $1,000, round it up, round it down, whatever. Make sure you still got some contingency left over. And I think there's loads of like nuanced questions there, which are things like, how many backers do you need to actually do that? Do you want to base that assumption on a split between digital and physical copies? Don't do that. Just base it all on physical. And it kind of gets into the boring questions, but it's genuinely not as difficult as it shouldn't feel more difficult than what are my costs, what are my fixed costs, what are my fees, things like that. You can put a spreadsheet together to do this in under 10 minutes if you if you've got a little bit of experience in publishing in general, which, like, if you've published a zine before, you know what is expected, right?
And there's many good templates out there for that, for
real
spreadsheet. And then, as you mentioned, especially if you're starting with a project that is not like ready to ship, which is the thing most indie publishers sort of have to start with, because they get the money to pursue projects by kickstarting. Is as you mentioned, prices are going to go up. They're going to shift. Sometimes they will go down, especially in printing, because printing is printing runs by sorcery. As far as with everything from ink supplies to paper supplies to anything else, having an effect on how much your book is going to cost, or what the unit cost on that printed book is going to be. So that may be higher or lower than what you're looking at the time you actually fund. Same thing with shipping. But I think that's, thank you. So I think that I want to come back to the issue of, if you're worried that your costs are too high for what you think you can fund. If you've run Kickstarters before, you may have a general impression of how much an audience you have, or how much your audience is, how much your audience is generally going to put out for your work. You may have a general impression of what other projects that are similar to yours or have some overlap with yours have done. And you're worried that you're not going to hit the goal for that bare minimum, what are some of the options you can pursue or start thinking about as you get to that very first, as you start to plan for that Kickstarter?
Start smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Start if you are dead set on, if you are set on publishing a something,
Right.
start digital only and
Mm-hmm.
add in printing later, because printing's expensive and it adds stuff that you don't think of, like shipping and
Right.
buying envelopes. Envelopes are really expensive.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Definitely.
Like,
And all those little shipments out to the store and out
start
to the distributor, out to all those other places, those add up too,
start
in
small.
ways that are hard to predict.
Yeah, and start smaller than you think as well. Like, if
Mhm.
you want a fully illustrated 300-page book, don't do that. Like,
Right.
start with whatever number of illustrations you think will make your product look okay. This does get into a kind of other general problem I have
Mhm.
with indie publishing, which is a question of aesthetics. But
Mhm.
let's not get into that. Because I'm just moany. Just start small and add stuff later. If you get an impetus going for your project, you can add more illustration later if you get more money.
Mhm.
Like, illustrators are quite expensive, but they're also quite flexible. You can always pay them more money for them to do stuff for you.
Right.
Yeah, like, add your printing costs as a stretch goal. Why not? You can do that. It's kind of challenging because you don't know if you're going to sell them all, but if you get 100 copies printed and you only sold 50, well, you've got 50 to send to Indie Press Revolution. That's great.
Right.
Whatever, like, just fund printing separately, or do it out of your contingency pot. Totally fine. There's shortcuts you can take. Like, if you really want to cut back on your editing budget, there are a few tricks to editing things yourself, or at least on the cheap.
Mhm.
As an editor, I encourage this.
Right.
At the very least, you're going to get a better manuscript to send to an editor if you do ultimately get money. So that's just tricks like making sure you use spell checks and making sure you put it through a reasonably competent grammar checker. Things
Right.
like, it's really stupid, but if you just change the font size in your document, it makes it so much easier to spot mistakes, because things like paragraph flow and things like that. Or read it aloud to yourself. That's a really good tip to
Yeah,
make
I
sure
was
that
going to
things
say
make
that's the
sense.
one I usually, as a
Yeah.
former writing teacher, that was the one I always recommended to students, is read
Yeah,
it aloud.
absolutely. Read it aloud, because if it doesn't make sense reading it aloud, then it doesn't make sense if you're reading it for the first time. That's what I always say to people.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like, 4 tips straight up there that you can potentially reduce your editing costs.
Mhm.
Offer royalties to people. They might not want to do that, but if you say, okay, I'm going to take 65% of the money from this, and between you lot, you're going to take 10% each, and then there's 5% left for whatever, maybe
Mhm.
they'll go for that, and maybe they'll go at part royalties, part upfront fee. And, like, I think that's cool as well. I think
Mhm.
that's a really cool way to reduce your costs. It's not for everybody, and not
Right.
every freelancer is going to want to do that, because it's a lot of hassle. I will also say that it's a lot of hassle as a project manager to have to divvy up those royalties from certain networks.
Mhm.
Itch.io, naming no names.
Right.
But that's a way you can reduce costs as well. Like, there's loads of, I work in building consultancy, and, like, that's value engineering.
Right.
That's what we
Right.
call it. There's ways to reduce stuff, and then you can just add that value if you do make your funding goal and you do get a little bit of extra cash. So
Mhm.
yeah, look at a project as a flexible thing,
Mhm.
and don't go for broke on your first project. Like, we were looking at really fancy books, like
Right. Yeah.
very, very nice, very high-end
Mhm.
books. Probably we shouldn't have done that. Like, that probably wasn't a good move. In the past, when we've done crowdfunding, we've gone for POD, a print on demand option
Mhm.
only, because printing's hard. It's
It's so
expensive,
hard.
and it
Yeah.
adds so many extra problems. So Not that print on demand doesn't add problems, but it's it's less expensive for the less risk on the publisher. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you also don't have to predict how many copies you need to print, how many need to get
No,
off.
it entirely falls on the consumer. And actually, you don't have to rely on Lightning Source now, which is DTRPG's print on demand specialist. Like Lulu produce decent books.
Right.
Their
No,
pricing software is janky, but all the Mixam's new print on demand options, and they all look nice,
Yeah.
So.
And I'm really interested to see, and I feel like that's probably a different episode where we go over print on demand options and how they work. The main reason I have stuck with drive-through is because it's really easy to send out those POD coupons
for absolute real. Yeah.
It's where Lulu makes it real. It is a fight with Lulu.
For real.
Oh
my goodness.
They keep looking at you blankly, like, why in the world would you want to do it that way?
Why do you want money? No.
why would you want to send one person a coupon and not everybody a coupon? It's just like, well, one person has already paid for the book. So that there's the struggles there. I feel like POD is a great thing coming up. That we could talk about. And I really like that you talked about like scaling back your project slightly. One thing that when we ran a workshop, Vidicia Valetti and Mary Jardescu and I got to do a workshop with Ray Olson and Tony this summer here in Brooklyn that was live. And we had several people ask us, so I have this idea for a 300-page book as my first project. And it's just like, and it's just like, and that's great that you have the idea and you have the passion and it's really exciting. It's a lot of, how do I get portions of this book out there at a time is frequently what I'm excited to see. I was really, really excited to see Necrotic Gnome many years ago starting Wormwood as a series of POD zines rather than immediately jumping into Wormwood as a giant sort of like complete, fully hexed out OSR world. And they were able to build up a lot of things that way that they wouldn't have been able to do if they'd initially started with a 300-page book.
I have a lot of respect for people who have the energy to produce a 300-page book. And there are people who do that. You write it themselves, they'll self-edit, they'll lay it out themselves. And, there was a reason in the 90s that you called these heartbreakers. It's because you'd have to pour tens of thousands of dollars into it and you maybe make $50,000.
And there was no IPR then to distribute it for you.
DTRPG changed the scene like so powerfully, and it meant that people could write weird 300-page games and make maybe make some money out of it. Like self-publishing is cool and powerful, but you maybe don't need to do it.
Right.
If your first project cool, keep your 300-page project, work on it, spend years doing it. What you should do first is publish a zine. A 48-page softcover zine that you don't even need to get printed. And if it's a bit rubbish, people have probably only paid $5-10 for it. It does so many cool things for you, and it teaches you a lot about actually how to make something, how to publish something, how to work with other people maybe. And that's cool. I'm very in favor of people starting small.
I thought it was fascinating that when TSR started, and I am not one to talk about or try to romanticize the history of TSR.
No,
not at all. But I think it was fascinating that when TSR started, they published several games solely to get the money to publish D&D. They did not immediately jump into publishing this very new experimental genre of game that had pretty much only existed in zines and science fiction societies.
Well, I think that's
a decade or so before that.
A thing that we forget about the role-playing game industry is that it started in pamphlets. It started in what we now call zines. And I think we sort of tend to think of zines as being this really modern, cool thing, but it's kind of waxed and waned over the years. You went from stuff being published in pamphlets and zines and stapled together in a weird shop somewhere to big heavy tomes coming out in the 80s and 90s, and then we're kind of waning back from that and going into smaller format things because they're achievable, manageable, and kind of they're sort of a lot more punk than producing a hardcover novel, you know.
Right. Yeah. The things that like feel much more like a thing people would pick up at any other shop, and not something that screams like this was formatted and thought of as a role-playing game from the get-go.
Yeah.
Or that, and I feel like we are one of the last industries that sticks to this notion of like the 8.5 by 11 or the A5 size hardback book as the standard for what we're all aspiring to.
Yeah.
All right. So if it, again, sort of coming back to this kind of imaginary audience in a mutual aid focused server that you and I have both been part of, if people are coming up on a project that seems to be struggling and they're trying to make a decision about what to do, could you talk a little bit about sort of how you might guide them through sort of yep. I feel like Marx is in parent mode. And I will, all right.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, an imaginary audience in a
in a kind of a mutual aid focused small indie publishers Discord. Someone is talking about a project that is struggling to fund, or that they're having trouble funding. Could you talk about a little bit like how you made the decision to kind of go ahead? I know some publishers will decide that, oh, this may not be the right time, I'm going to go ahead and pull the project. Other publishers like you will go ahead and say, like, let's see how much we can do and see how far we can take this.
Yeah.
How would you that's through making that decision, or at least sort of talk about like sort of how you made the decision you did?
Yeah. And a lot of people did say it's cleaner to pull the plug now, because then your crowdfunding history, when people pull that up when they're checking your next project, it'll be cancelled rather than failed.
Right.
I think that word difference there makes a lot of difference to psychology.
Yeah.
To countenance that, I sort of thought maybe we can make it. And because I was running the project, and I was maybe going in a bit naively on this. It wasn't my first role-playing game project. Yeah. It wasn't even my third, you know. It's like we've done a lot of this in the past. And I sort of thought what we've got here is quite special, quite different. I think a lot of people have told us that it's a really good idea and they'd be into it. Not so much getting that from the crowdfunding campaign, but fine, whatever. And we sort of found ourselves saying, well, let's just keep pushing. I don't know. Maybe that's the brave approach, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just more pragmatic to say, let's cut our losses now because we haven't made 50% by halfway through the campaign, so let's stop doing this. And I think that's probably a reasonable cutoff period. Some people would say if it doesn't fund in the first 3 days, then you should just cancel it. I have to say my first crowdfunding campaign funded in the first 7 days, which was great when it happened. But yeah, that was, so I would have, following that advice, I would have pulled earlier than my campaign funded. So it's, I don't know. I think ultimately you have to make the decision that's right for you as a publisher. And if you feel like another 2 weeks of this is going to make me feel really awful, if I just have to continually be optimistic about it and talk about it constantly, when actually I know that it ain't going to happen, is that going to hurt me? Is that going to hurt how I feel about the role-playing game scene? If I stop now, do I keep a little bit of my own enthusiasm about this project for whatever we do in the future with it? And probably with hindsight, we should have cut the campaign. But I think it's quite hard to do that. It's quite hard to say, oh, I am accepting that my baby won't fund. You know?
Right.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Um,
So I don't know. Is the
yeah.
answer to your question is I couldn't give that advice. I can only show my experience and
Mm.
my hindsight, which is to say I shouldn't have done that. I should
Okay.
have stopped it earlier. But it depends on your publisher circumstances, I guess.
Right. And I know from or at least my understanding is logistically, all the advantages of a cancel campaign are the same for a failed campaign. You still have access to updates to those backers.
Yeah.
You still get to post to that. I think the big thing to talk about or think about there is the emotional impact of either option of canceling or pushing through to the end.
I think realistically there is that kind of back of brain difference between failed and cancelled. Failed suggests not enough interest. Cancelled is the same thing, but it's a business decision that you've moved away from it. I think there is a kind of that's slightly more acceptable and fine. Okay. I'm okay with that. Again, it's that kind of psychology thing that you're fighting against, and that's it, but you're right. It is an emotional thing that you have to kind of decide what is going to be less hurtful.
Right. I think the sort of the last question on that before moving on to sort of the last few minutes of the stream, seeing if there's any questions from the audience and audience members on both YouTube channels that we are broadcasting to. Feel free to add any questions you have that you would like Marx to answer. But I think what are your sort of suggestions or thoughts on sort of self-care or maintaining your own ability to kind of move forward through a failed Kickstarter? I know that there's talking to new designers, there's sometimes the impression that Kickstarter has created this guaranteed path forward for all of us that we on one level as experienced designers we know that's not true. So it can be rough emotionally when something doesn't make. Do you have any thoughts on sort of what is how would you, kind of set yourself up to keep moving in that kind of situation?
I think so. When we had failed campaign, what I did immediately was I said thank you to everybody in the project team. I said I did apologize, which I didn't really mean to, but I felt responsible. And then I stepped away. I uninstalled Discord from my phone. I didn't log into Discord. I didn't log into Twitter or anything else for about a week because I didn't want to think about it. I just wanted to step away completely. When I came back, I felt a lot better. And the other thing is I don't do this full time. I have a day job. And I think that really, really helps you get a lot of space from this. I've also got 3 young kids that attested to this stream. I'm busy, I'm really busy. So having something else to focus on, something else to do for a couple of weeks, I think this is generally really good advice, even if you have a successful Kickstarter, is to just not think about it for a week. Send out whatever initial stuff you need to do and then turn it off and walk away. And I think that allows you to come back and look at things pragmatically and ask questions that you can answer objectively without that kind of 3 a.m. crying into absinthe feeling. It's you are a publisher who has a responsibility to do stuff in a certain way, and that's cool. So actually behave like a professional. it's totally fine to get emotional about the projects, but you have to look at your business decisions and your publishing decisions like objectively, ultimately, even
Right.
if you're doing something really personal. So that's my general advice: is to just don't think about it, walk away, turn off your social media, and only talk to people you really like.
Yeah. I think that's even good advice when things have been going pretty okay, because otherwise, like even
absolutely.
when things are going okay, there's moments where you're going to be like, oh, but benchmarking myself, about where I wanted to be or what I hope would be happening isn't happening. And if you can't stand up and walk away for a time, even when things are going okay, it's really easy just to live in those numbers. And eventually, no matter how good the data looks, it's going to look bad if you keep looking at it. And remembering that you have another identity other than just being a publisher.
Exactly. And a publicist and a marketer as well. If you are, I don't know, if you're constantly talking about your campaign for 4 weeks, as we were, and then you get to the end of it and like, oh, cool, yeah, we got quadruple our funding goal, fantastic. There's going to be a kind of crash and burn when you come to the end of that. And you kind of have to be able to see that coming and say to yourself, you know what, at the end of this funding period, I am going to go to a cabin in the woods for a couple of nights and I'm going to not do anything to do with publishing stuff, because I'm just at the end of it now. And then you can come back and you can do all of the stuff that you need to do and you can be super happy about it. But you've got to be able to not think about it for a couple of days, I think.
So, Marx, what is for you, and both for you and for Horizons in general, what is coming next? What is coming up project-wise that you're excited about, or that you're pursuing, or you're interested in next?
We have discussed the Guide to Death coming back, and we did think about doing it for Zine Month. That ain't going to happen now because we haven't put out enough feelers. But what the plan currently is for us to fund one game at a time, published in zine format, for a greatly reduced price, because it ain't going to be a £40 book. It's going to be a kind of, I don't want to give prices because I haven't really thought about it very much, but much lower price point on individual zines. Working through our list of games with some stretch goals as well, things like that. That's the plan. I don't know when we'll be doing it, but we're doing it later in the year. That's what we want to do. We've got other stuff in the pipeline at the moment. We've got somebody who's making a game about giant freaking robots, which sounds pretty cool. We've got the second season of 1,000 Burning Stars, which is a series of like small game zines, which they'll be really fun. They're gonna be cool. I'm not running that series because I've taken a little bit of a backseat in project management roles at the moment. Those are going to be cool. Those are cool games, but I couldn't tell you anything about any of them because I can't remember. What else is in the pipeline? Can't think, but people. We have a publisher who Kamala Kara Arroyo, who wrote Friendship Effort Victory. It's her game about giant freaking robots, and then she has another one also inspired by popular anime about monsters that live in your pocket, possibly. Couldn't really tell you too many details about that because it's a bit hush-hush at the moment, but it's going to be something like that. It's going to be cool. And then, I guess there's probably going to be another guides project at some point. Not sure what it's going to be. We've bandied around a few ideas about cities. Not sure if that's what the plan is, but we'd like to do something fun. We've got some ideas. Yeah, so there's loads of stuff in the pipeline. We've got a big we've got a massive membership at the moment of really talented people. So there's loads of people drawing on ideas from. So well, we're having fun.
And just from the chat, Sigmund Hotep mentioned that that when I see canceled, I think failed, but trying to be clever about it. I do think there's definitely reasons that people cancel that aren't failing, but I think part of that temptation to like is always to think, oh, maybe something just came up, which I know there are definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that before.
Things have just come up.
Yeah, like people get hit with massive medical bills, or there's got sudden illness, things like that. The cancellation isn't always about your project's going to fail. It's about I got sidetracked.
Right. Occasionally, it's co-creator had to had to back out of the project. Halfway through funding, has happened, but definitely I think that's frequently that it's just like at some point it becomes hard to keep talking about a project that is you're worried is gonna go through to the end, because it's so much energy to run a crowdfunding campaign. I think it's been a little easier with things like itch funding or slow funding has definitely been emotionally easier, but anytime you're on that kind of a tight schedule that's kind of inflexible and has a very fixed goal, it's really easy just to like let it completely take over your brain for 2, 3, 4 weeks, 31 days. And I know it sounds like that's also been your experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like I'm speaking up for Zine Month here because they sort of say, do 2-week projects. 2-week projects are absolutely perfect.
2-week projects.
I only have to think about things for 2 weeks. Fantastic.
Yeah. Having finally run my first over 4-week project, I really want to go back to running 2-week projects because you just
big same.
Yeah, it's you earn like it never changes that you just get most of your funding in the first 3 days and the last 3 days.
So may as well just make that rubbish bit in the middle only 8 days long.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And and that's can be different if you have teams. And I know we've seen a few very successful projects get off to slower starts than we used to see. So it's possible that things are changing around the crowdfunding space.
The landscape is definitely changing.
That emotionally, when you're doing it by yourself, 2 weeks is so much easier than trying to do.
Hard agree with that.
So thank you all for joining us. Marx, thank you so much for being here to kind of kick this off and
absolutely
have the very first time doing this stream. We'll be back in February. We're still sort of selecting topics, and I have a guest that I'm recruiting pinpointed, but I won't put them under pressure since they've made no commitments yet. But I'm pretty excited. If they're able to make it. But we'll be back third Tuesday in February. And every month thereafter with Wizard Killers. And Marx, thanks so much for being the first person to join us. And we still have no better way to end a stream than to just wave at the camera till we get an all clear. So we'll just wave. Oh, wait, have to wave on a smaller